Okay, well, I'm excited about the next part of this program, which is a panel. So now I'm going to turn it over to Professor Robyn Weinstein from the Cardozo Law School, who is the panel moderator.
Thanks, Genesis. I also, before we start, I just want to thank you and Peter Phillips for organizing this program, and to New York Law School for its continuous commitment in hosting an event dedicated to diversity and dispute resolution in our New York community. So thank you to you both. I'm very excited. My panel members are all here. They were not, I don't know if we're spotlighted, so I guess when they start talking, they'll just pop to the top maybe. But I'm joined by 3 individuals today from different jurisdictions in the United States who have each been responsible for implementing an initiative that is focused on dispute resolution and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these initiatives are really aimed at addressing different aspects of the challenges in increasing the number of folks from different communities who are participating in our field, who are successful in our field, and who are able to get work in our field. So I'm very excited to bring them all to you. And each of them is going to introduce themselves. So the first presenter that I will introduce you to, and then she'll share a little bit about her background, is Cristina Maldonado, and she comes to us from Florida, and so she's going to bring her expertise. So please just tell them a bit about yourself, Anna, and then we'll introduce the next panelist.
Sure. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm blown away by the fact that this is the 8th symposium as well. We're having our first one in Florida in March, and so I'm hoping that we'll start the run down here too. I am based in Palm Beach County, so that's South Florida, and I've been a full-time neutral for 13 years. I've done over 2,000 cases. I started off as a courthouse mediator, doing a lot of family and juvenile dependency mediation work. I left the courthouse and moved out as a true solo neutral, and worked in those areas just and broadening my business, and then was picked up by a state panel here in Florida called Upchurch, Watson, White, and Max, which is one of the 2 sort of original, long-term panels in the state of Florida. And I just left them at the end of the last month to join the faculty at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, as their director of externships, but they have a really good ADR program, so I haven't left the tent, nor will I ever, because I am a big ADR nerd and love it. I'm a mediation trainer here in Florida. I am on the State Mediator Ethics Advisory Committee, and I am also chair-elect of the Alternative Dispute Resolution section of the Florida Bar. We're one of the larger bars in the country. We have 100,000 lawyers, and the section has about 1,000 people in it, a little bit over. And I started the diversity committee, which just for fun and to kind of get out of that like meh HR language that drives everyone crazy. We called it the Jedi Committee for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, because who doesn't love Star Wars, right? And that is, I mediate in Spanish and in Portuguese and as well. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Anna, and thank you for joining us from Florida. Next, from North Carolina, we have Pete Singh.
Everybody, Philadelphia native, North Carolina transplant. Honored to be with you all tonight, and very much appreciate the work putting it all together. Thank you, Robyn. So I'm Pete, practicing lawyer for a little less than 10 years now, Duke Law grad, and first got the ADR itch in a negotiations course there under tutelage of Bob Beeson. He's kind of a North Carolina staple in the ADR field. He was one of the founding members of the Dispute Resolution Commission, which is the certifying body in the state. So he kind of poured into me as a student, and right out of law school, I got started with FINRA and some other panels, kind of tacking on roster spots as I've gone along. Just a note, and this ties into the diversity piece going forward. Patience is a virtue and a key. So a lot of my being impaneled and approved and certified led to nothing for a while, and only recently began actually being selected for cases and building traction on that front from partially just from aging and kind of gaining credibility that way, but also networking and some other things folk will touch on. But reason I'm here tonight, as part of the North Carolina Bar Association dispute resolution section, we have a race and equity committee that I co-chair, and we started something called a Try Someone New campaign, a list of diverse mediators and Spanish-speaking mediators, because we got tired of the excuse that the proverbial they can't find us. So we made it easy, built a list, and it's growing as we go. A part of that effort has also been a scholarship program that's been supported by the bar. So we've been able to get neutrals through basic training, advanced commercial training, and certified by the Dispute Resolution Commission here. So besides that ADR stuff, I'm still a practicing attorney by day with a firm called Fourscore, focused on business law, mergers and acquisitions, finance. And on the side, started a Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts-esque organization to cover North Carolina and South Carolina. So that's Carolina Lawyers for the Arts and Entertainment. And that also will have a dispute resolution arm to it. Still coining a phrase for it, but we'll see what sticks. So that's me in a nutshell, husband and father as well. But that's why I'm here. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Pete. That makes me feel even more lucky that you're here because you sound very busy. And last but not least, we have Judge Kate Von Tersteeg, who comes from Oregon.
Hi, I'm Kate Von Tersteeg, and I am a state court trial judge in Oregon. I guess since Pete was geographic, I will say most Oregonians, I'm actually a Californian, but I'm a true West Coaster, except I went to law school at the University of Virginia. I will say I am a court person. I've been a court person my entire career. So I clerked for a judge out of law school, and then I was a prosecutor for a while here in Portland. And then I spent the majority of my career as a government lawyer defending civil rights and employment and tort lawsuits, first for the state attorney general office and then for the county that Portland sits in. And in my current practice as a judge, I just have a general civil and criminal docket. So I don't do any family law, no child custody, divorce. I don't do any probate, but I do any kind of criminal and civil litigation that doesn't fit into those categories. So huge cases to tiny cases, like I have done dog custody cases, which don't fall into the family law department. And I do settlement conferences as a judge. And one of the things that I like most about our court is that you can get a settlement conference in a criminal case for free. And you can get a settlement conference in a civil case for $450, which means one side pays half of $450 and you can get a fee deferral. And I'm not sure we ever collect on the fee deferrals. So at least in sort of my day job, I'm part of a really amazingly diverse bench that does offer ADR basically at no cost. And I'm also part of an organization called the Oregon Mediation Diversity Project.
Yes, and you're going to be talking about that.
Yes.
And so thank you, everybody, for being here and for introducing yourselves. And Jennison mentioned that I direct the mediation clinic at Cardozo Law School. I became interested in diversity, equity, inclusion really when I was sitting in the seat of the ADR administrator for the Eastern District of New York. And I see many of the neutrals are in this Zoom space right now. So hi, everyone. But through being in that position, the panel was closed for 11 years. And as a result, it really didn't reflect the community that we served in the district. It was a very diverse district. So I spent a lot of time learning about how I might diversify the program and really attract talent from people from different communities, people that spoke different languages, and people that could serve the court. And through that journey, I partnered up with another person from New Hampshire who oversaw their ADR program, and we started searching the country for just like, what are other people doing? What are ideas that people are implementing in different jurisdictions? We were really excited to find that there were some. And so what you have here before you with this group of people are individuals that have from the ground up really like created programs and initiatives with the intent to diversify the field. And almost all of it, I think all of us operate 100% volunteer for the most part, or do it on the side. But I think, Pete, you started to talk about the Try Someone New directory that you developed. Do you want to tell everyone a bit about, sort of how your group that you mentioned through the Bar Association, how this came to be, and what steps you took to implement this program?
Sure thing, and I'll drop a link to it in the chat here as well. So part of it was born from, luckily I was selected as a AAA Higginbotham Fellow back in 2020, and COVID. We actually got a chance to do the program in 2022. And a lot of that inspired me to come back home and do some work. So we were discussing ways to break the ceiling or the barrier. What we were hearing time and time again was that, of course, every mediator and lawyer supposedly cares and wants to reach out to people they haven't used before, break out of kind of the wizened old white ranks that they're used to. But the excuse we heard time and time again was that they cannot find diverse neutrals. We knew that we exist and that we have some profiles, and they're kind of not compiled and easy to find necessarily. So as a solution, we just created one list, one central database, along with a couple articles and soft feelies about why diversity is important for the field. But ultimately, it's contact information at its essence, and an easy way to find us, to access us, to help in any capacity. So whether that's counsel on cases, other mediators or neutrals that need coverage, they can kind of treat this as a referral list, and really born to address and defeat the age-old excuse that we're hard to find. To the extent these things can be modeled, we don't make any IP claims to it at all. So if you can follow suit, it has proved to be a really great way, even just to start conversations around the topic, let people know who's here, who's coming. And as I mentioned, we've kind of used this as a push to build a pipeline as well, for more diverse neutrals and talent to come in, and to know that there's a place for them when they are certified.
Were there any specific steps you had to take with the Bar Association to get them to make this part of the official website, or was that challenging? Was it straightforward? What was your experience?
Yeah, so no real challenge, nothing to it but to do it, essentially. We had to come up with a plan of attack to get the information in. So we really kicked it off with a campaign to get responses. We created a form where everyone could kind of fill in their experience, their contact info, give us a brief bio, a picture. And then we followed up a couple times. The first wave of responses could have been discouraging. We only had a handful, but kind of keep plugging away. We were able to get a critical mass of about a dozen. And then we had something to share. The bar was really helpful, lending us some of their internal resources, and the person that actually builds out the website, web developer, took it on themselves to make it presentable, pretty, and it was pretty easy to connect the dots. The key was just to have a point person they could go to either address some typos or other issues that might have sprung up in that data dump. But ultimately, just one point person from the bar, one point person from our committee got it done.
Thank you. Kate, you mentioned that you're a part of the Oregon Mediator Diversity Project. Could you share more about what that project is and what your goals and objectives were for building that project, and a bit about the process?
Yes, I feel like I'm maybe answering some of your questions a little out of order. I think that especially, I'm guessing most of the people who are participating in the symposium are from the East Coast, if not the New York area. I think it probably helps to have a little bit of context about Oregon. And I will say that I lived here for quite a while before I even understood some of this context. Oregon it's a place with a lot of things going for it and a lot of things working against it. I think it's important to say that it's an overwhelmingly white state. Before Oregon became a state, the Oregon Territory had laws that it was illegal for Black people to come into the territory of Oregon. When it entered the Union, eventually that same exclusion made its way into the Oregon Constitution. And then in the 1860s, there was a $5 tax, which I'm sure was a huge tax in the 1860s, levied on essentially every person in the state who wasn't white. And if you couldn't pay the tax, you had to perform road work to work it off. The exclusionary provision in the Constitution, making it illegal for Black people to come into the state, I think wasn't removed from the Constitution until maybe the 1930s. And then there were a lot of restrictive covenants and neighborhoods, and there were a couple of prominent Black neighborhoods in Portland that were destroyed either by natural disasters or through eminent domain and zoning attacks. And so the 2019 census in Oregon, I think the white population was about 87% of the state. And if you look at the data for lawyers in Oregon, it's about the same. If you add the white people plus the people who declined to say, I think it's about the same. And so everyone who does, until our project, who did private mediation, especially high dollar civil mediation, was white. Probably more men than women, a fair number of women, but all people kind of at the end of their careers or in the latter third of their careers. And we decided to come together, and I can explain a little bit more about this later, but how we got to the point of determining that there were exactly 0 mediators of color working in the state of Oregon. But we, some lawyers and another judge and I, formed a group to try to address this problem. And so we started by putting on CLEs, telling people, oh, you should really consider this, and then having to explain, but there really aren't any resources in Oregon for lawyers to teach you how to do this. And we realized we were kind of encouraging people to fill a need that we saw in terms of the needs of the bar and the needs of the people of the state of Oregon. And we were asking them to take professional risks and economic risks without really telling them how to do it or without providing any kind of infrastructure or support. So the pandemic was a huge interrupter in bad ways, but also in good ways. And so in 2020, we were like, okay, well, how do we really move the needle instead of telling people there are no mediators of color and then telling lawyers of color, hey, you should do this to fix this problem? We decided that the barrier to entry that we could possibly affect was the lack of mediation training, right? We can't dismantle power structures. We can't quickly dismantle the kind of who you know, not trying someone new, collegial culture that we have in Oregon. There were absolutely no mediation training programs in Oregon for lawyers. For non-lawyers, yes, but not for lawyers. So if you wanted to do mediation training, sort of it's like a name brand training, you could go to Harvard and pay $6,000, or you could go to Pepperdine and pay $4,000. But for a lot of people, you know, who have busy work schedules and family obligations, that's not really practical. So what we did was we built a mediation training from the ground up. And the first problem we encountered was who do we get to teach this program? We don't want to populate the instructors with the people who are successfully running mediation practices in Oregon, because that's just sort of perpetuating some of the problem. Luckily, because of another group called the Oregon Judicial Diversity Coalition, we have a very diverse bench, especially in the Portland area, the federal bench and the state court bench. And so we were able to pull a number of people to teach mediation sort of lectures. And so what we did was we created a 6-day training that we developed from scratch. We wrote all of our own hypotheticals to really confront issues that people need to have skills with head on. So conflicts involving race, money, disability, age, all of the stuff that happens in the real world for people to work on in terms of hypothetical mediation skills. So we had lectures and we had hypothetical, we had mediations based on hypotheticals. We had an application process, and I think that we only were able to admit 1/3 of the people who applied. And so we had a sort of an initial class of 16 people, and we did it some weekdays, but mostly on the weekends over we did 6 full days of training over 3 months, I think, to allow people who wanted to participate, especially people who didn't live in the Portland metro area, to get here without a huge amount of inconvenience to their schedules. And so that's what we did. We did a training, and that was in, we had to delay it a bit, of course, because of COVID, but we did it in 2021.
Thanks, Kate. Anna, do you want to tell us about JEDI and the work that JEDI has done, in particular the research project? Maybe
Sure.
begin there.
Sure. Well, JEDI started from a combination of experiences on my end that are similar to what Pete is describing. You know, fell in love with it early, and then sort of got credentialed and was like, all right, if you build it, they will come. And then you're kind of waiting for them to come. And you're like, crickets, all right, how are you gonna do this? And there are a couple of notable white male mediators in Florida who I have seen write articles over the years about this. And some here in Florida, you would think that we're more diverse, you know, just sort of broadly speaking. The north of the state and the south of the state are sort of different entities in some ways. So I'm in the south, and it's easy to kind of take that diversity for granted in some ways. But it doesn't manifest fully in the lawyer pool still. And And in the mediator pool, a lot of the diverse neutrals are non-attorneys coming from other professions, and so who are filling the space. And Kate kind of alluded to the fact that certain of we have formal state certifications. I'm actually a mediation trainer. So I teach the 40-hour course in 3 out of the 5 certs that we have. And the circuit civil cert skews very male and white. County is basically close to the demographics of the state, People's Court, right? Family skews very female, and is pretty diverse, pretty close to the demographics of the state. And dependency is sort of actually more white and more female. So it depends on what angle, what side of mediation you're looking at. But in looking at it, I came across a podcast by Linda Klein, who's the former president of the American Bar Association. And she gave me the idea to just kind of look at what they did with, trickled it down to Florida, basically, kind of the analysis and the concepts, and try to figure out how to implement that here. I went looking for the numbers. Kate, you kind of mentioned this, because when you check off the box of your demographics, it's sort of a voluntary thing. The bar doesn't have 100% data. And so there's really not a way to kind of say, how does the population of your bar match the population of your state, right? And so, and I did this through like a FOIA, free sunshine law kind of information request. I'm a member of the bar, so I asked for the data and they sent it in, and me in spreadsheets. I'm a friend with Excel. So I sat down and did that. And then I did the same for the mediators. We actually have a pretty good database that was created at the beginning of when we have basically an office of ADR. It's called the Dispute Resolution Center, and it's run through the office of the state's courts administrator, who are like the HR wing of the branch of the judiciary here. And so the DRC has a mediator member search, and we all kind of fill out stuff on our applications, and it's all in a database. Anybody can look it up, and I'll put the link in there in the chat in a second there. Also with another article that some of our members wrote for the Florida Bar Journal. And so I pulled the numbers to try to get a baseline data, because like when you give numbers, people are like, that catches people's attention, right? Just as an intro, right? You sort of get that, like mediation, you get that no first. Do you know anybody from pizza? No, we don't know anybody. How many mediators of color are there in Oregon? None. Stuff like those kinds of like definitive sort of borderline answers are prompts to go beyond. And so that started it. And we basically are in a stage now of like outreach and education, because a lot of people just haven't thought of this as a problem. So first, you kind of have to make people think about it. And that just involves like talking and writing and reaching out to people who hire neutrals, saying, hey, think about your mediator panel in the last year or over your practice. How many people are not male and not white on your panel, or that you've used, that you've selected? Same thing with with your mediator, like your short list, right? The short list that every lawyer keeps, right? Or your arbitrator panel, same question. And you can kind of watch them kind of go, that's a good question. And they sort of, their brains kind of go to that corner of their, to try to figure it out. And you can tell from some people's faces that sort of the who do you know is operating, and that there's, they've never thought about it. So even if they're a person of goodwill, they've never taken that extra step. So I love Pete's question with try someone new, and providing the resources to do that. We may have to, if it's copyrighted, we may have to float down here to Florida, some way, shape, or form. That's on the selection side, and on the supply side of things, there's two things. One, you got to get people to think about getting trained. And there are some people, I feel like the younger generations of lawyers have had more access to negotiation class, mediation clinics, mediation seminars, much more likely to have encountered it than older attorneys who never saw it in school and encountered, mediation in the practice, right? And so they're more tuned into it, but they still have that same selection problem that I know several people who have passionate about the subject can't make a living at it. You know, it's very hard to switch gears and to work as a full-time neutral because you don't get bigger cases. You know, I'd say probably 40% of my work involves at least one Hispanic party or lawyer, you know, and so you kind of end up in the niche. And so, or the language, you know, language type issues or something like that. And trying to break out from there to a larger practice is very challenging. And so that can be very discouraging when people are sort of trying to push against that wall and not seeing any progress. So we've had, we did a panel called Are We There Yet? With Linda Klein, actually, who I just spammed on LinkedIn, basically, and she agreed to do this with us. And the woman who is now like 2 steps away from being the first African-American woman bar president in the bar's history in Florida, and our former female president of the bar. We just locally, I did one with the Hispanic bar in Palm Beach County called Mediating with Latinos and Mediating While Latino. That was fun. And I had a lot of people come up, you know, younger lawyers come up to me like, oh, I never thought of mediation. Maybe I'm going to go get trained. I'm like, yeah, it's a great idea. And then the numbers, I sort of always lead off with those numbers, Robyn, because they make people think. They really, that's the hook for the conversation. So that's that baseline, like if you measure what matters, that baseline was really important. And I hope it'll help us track progress over time, because this is still early. We started in 2020 also, so.
And all of these projects are kind of post 2020, is that right?
Mhm.
Everybody is pretty new. And the projects that I've worked on are also, I think one is 2019. But in our jurisdiction, everyone, in New York, we have some initiatives. Some were worked on by the New York City Bar ADR Committee, and the New York State Bar Dispute Resolution Section worked jointly to develop a directory of diverse neutrals that lives online that I will share here. And that was in partnership with, I think 23, although the list is on there, I haven't counted in a while, affinity bar associations. And we have neutrals categorized by language, ability, neutral type, self-identifying characteristics, and by practice area. So it's sort of searchable. It's not a perfect directory. It was made using Google Sites, but we got the support of both bar associations to do that. And I was on the team that helped develop that. Also in New York, another thing that I'm involved in is something called the ADR Inclusion Network. It's a group of individuals that are concerned at different levels in the field that are concerned with diversity, equity, inclusion in the field of dispute resolution. Very New York centric group. Although meeting all these folks from different jurisdictions, I think there's a big opportunity to work together collectively nationally to think about these issues. And then in my role at the EDNY when I was there, I helped to develop a mentorship program for junior attorneys to onboard into the court roster that way. So those are some local examples of initiatives that exist here in New York. And what I found, you know, Anna mentioned that she's really looking at the baseline, getting that data to help demonstrate that there actually is a problem. And in New York, you know, there's a public listing of the neutrals on the court rosters that's available. But again, I don't know that it's searchable by demographic data. The federal court panels, people are publicly listed, but you really have to go individual by individual to assess who the neutrals are. So that data is not something that I think we have developed here. You know, the private rosters, I know the AAA mentioned that they had it listed and they're able to get that data now and they're tracking it. But doing that work to establish the problem is something that I think is important in doing this. And then Kate, your initiative is developing the pipeline and really helping build out folks that could do this work or motivated to do this work, but haven't yet been trained. So building the pipeline piece, and Pete, you're connecting people with the actual clients and with the actual work. So it's once people go through the pipeline, connecting them with the opportunities to actually try and get paid work, as challenging as it is. So there's all these different aspects. This is a question for all of you. What are the challenges associated with implementing the projects that you did? What was hard about it? What is hard about it? How's it going? I can cry to you all about my challenges with mine, but would anybody like to share?
I'm glad to go. You know, it's funny that you say the 2020 thing, because I feel like that's sort of the point where we went from diversity being kind of an automatic good to don't make me uncomfortable. And Florida is sort of ground zero, if you will, for I'm sorry, no, New York. Florida is a testing ground for you know, the chilling effect and the death by 1,000 cuts. Like, you guys are getting 2.5 CLE credits in bias elimination, or bar eliminated bias elimination credits this year. So it's not like a category that people have to pursue anymore or look into or pay attention to anymore. So, you know, in the spirit of what's going on down here, I think it becomes, it makes us have to sharpen our pencil with what we're doing to be ready for any of the pushback that we're probably going to get, if we haven't gotten yet. At some point, we'll step on someone's toes eventually, is what it feels like. But hopefully the fact that we have difficult conversations for a living is going to be to our benefit. Point in time.
Kate?
So yeah, I would say that was a compound question. So in terms of like the challenges we had putting things together, you know, Oregon is filled with nice, helpful people who are, you know, we don't have any, for the most part, any of the pushback that Anna is talking about seeing or feeling kind of coming. We did our project all on a volunteer basis, and our idea was to keep the cost of the program for participants really low. We didn't want that to be a barrier. So I think we charged like $800 a person. We still have some money left over in our account, and a lot of it just went to pay for food because we wanted people to sort of bond. And I will say what was hard about it sort of was sorting out, at least ideologically, like who we wanted to come to the program. And I don't mean, you know, which sort of members of the bar sort of outside the dominant culture do we want? It was like, do we want people who we think will actually do this for a living, or do we want people at the end of their careers, or are we really trying to reach people at any stage of their career and just planting the idea? Interestingly enough, there were 2 retired judges who applied for our program, a Black judge and a Latino judge who I worked with as colleagues. And some of the people in our program wanted to not admit them because they're, you know, successful. They don't actually, they could just go out and people would call them up for work, and they can afford to take an expensive out-of-state training if they're interested in that. And I was like, we shouldn't really be employing a purity test for anyone. Like, we want people who will actually do this. And we also want people who we think would be good at it. We want to sort of plant the seeds in their mind that they can do it, give them the training, and then give them a cohort who can support them if they decide to do it. So we had a lot of trouble figuring out some of the subcategories of our mission statement, what we were really trying to do. And then I would just say, like, the major challenge in this program that we've got is the fact that we've been doing it all on a volunteer basis. And for me, in 2020 and 2021, we were not, after like March of 2020, we were not doing civil trials, and there were very few criminal trials. And so I had lots of time. Now I have, you know, very little time. I'm a mom, you know, I'm like mom taxi, there's sports stuff going on. It's awful. And everybody involved in our project from the get-go is a super high-powered, super successful person. And we're also busy. We plan to do the training again in 2023. It didn't happen, and we all let each other off the hook. And I was actually really excited when we had our planning meeting for this session, because I started to get excited again about this project. Be like, okay, I've got to get the energy and the time to put on another training. And so for us, like, a major issue is figuring out how to incorporate volunteers, but also how to connect ourselves to the state bar or to a law school where there might be more help for us in terms of actually just working through the steps of the program, and it not being a totally volunteer effort conducted by people who already have more than full-time jobs. And I will say another challenge that we have in Oregon, which is probably not an issue for most of the people who are participating in the symposium, is the fact that there's a huge urban-rural divide in Oregon. So Oregon has, it's a huge state, space-wise. Yeah, Anna knows, she's nodding her head. There are about 4 million people in the state. About half of them live in the Portland metro area. Most of them live in kind of a narrow band along the Willamette River in the western part of the state. And so we have a hard time getting lawyers to go or stay in smaller communities, let alone mediators. So we have a hard time even getting white lawyers to stay in smaller communities. So we want to encourage lawyers of color and people who haven't traditionally been represented in mediation to do this. But then we also have a challenge about, you know, how to get people to do this, but then how to give people around the state access. And Zoom is I think a good option, but we've just got a huge urban rural divide. I mean, most of the state, it's like hard to even find a vegetable, let alone a lawyer. And I mean that seriously, as somebody who likes to eat vegetables.
Yeah, I'll just add a bit to that. So there is a tide against the work that we do. We all kind of know about the affirmative action ruling last year, and Harvard was one of those schools. UNC was the other. So it's kind of a local and national issue to buck against. One thing I've just resolved not to be dissuaded by those tides, because I know the fight we're fighting it kind of pales in comparison to what my forefathers dealt with in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And unfortunate we're still having to battle on that front. But to me, it's nothing insurmountable. It kind of just does take some grit and thick skin. Like we're not gonna have smooth sailing setting these projects up or sustaining them. So the other key thing I think for me is I want the efforts that I set up and things I put in place to have some staying power beyond me, and not to kind of die off with my own limited time and capacity here on Earth broadly, but especially in the short term, just to make a push for these things. So a challenge to your question is really just galvanizing support from other people to also do the work, and in a way that doesn't necessarily put their name at the forefront or give them all the glory all at once. Especially in the lawyer camp, it's a little difficult to incentivize people to do good just because. But it's possible, and there are enough of us, I think, with the heart and the grit for it. We just have to be okay with being few and far between, even as widespread as this panel is. Just for example, we're doing it in our own local settings, hopefully to have broader impacts, and events like this to kind of bring us together, I think helps to address some gaps. But all in all, affirmative action opposition does bleed into these efforts for diversity we're pushing for. But we kind of just have to be okay with that for now.
Thank you for your answers on that. And just to dive a little bit deeper into sort of the current culture shift that's going around post, the students for fair admissions case and decision, one of the things that's been happening is there are law firms that have been sued for their diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, where they have programs that were geared towards people of color or people with a specific racial identity. And there were lawsuits filed against a few law firms that had these programs. And a lot of the firms that have these programs have now shifted their admission process to move away from a race-based program towards mirroring the application process as it's being revised by academic institutions. And I've been working with Ellen Waldman of CPR. We've written an article sort of explaining the changes that were made. But for those folks out there that are interested in implementing DEI initiatives in dispute resolution, the kinds of admission categories that seem acceptable are those that where people can share their life or lived experience, their desires and experience with diversity, equity, inclusion, and their intentions around that are all appropriate ways, according to this new case, to create an admissions process that includes diversity, equity, inclusion as a part of the program. But it seems that a lot of those programs that were very clearly focused on people of color or women or had a specific category in mind are moving away from that. So that's something that you may see out there, not just with ADR programs, but DEI initiatives generally. There was a very nice comment in the chat to Anna about, how folks from outside of Florida can be supportive of the dispute resolution community's DEI efforts in Florida. Anna, is there anything that you feel helps you or that helps you navigate, those conversations you're having with folks that maybe feel not positively about DEI efforts or initiatives?
I think I've crawled out of my fetal position. I was there for a while. But Florida is kind of the opposite of Oregon. And my mom's family is all from Oregon. So I'm like half Cuban Fuji on one side, and on the other side, it's like daughter of the American Revolution. So it's like a total combo there. Florida is a state where people come. And so my personal history in Florida starts when my dad got here in the 60s at 14 and when my mom's parents retired in 1970. So from the point where you arrive, from there on in is the history of the state, and it's mostly tied to your personal history, and it's whatever it is, and you're really linked to whatever you came from. And that happens all the time, every day, because there are people moving here from everywhere. And so I wasn't kidding when I said just talk to the people who who are down here, because everybody knows somebody in Florida at some point in time, and just sort of raise awareness. I think there's no guarantee that the one-to-one communication is going to shift it, but if you can have those conversations that will stop and make people think a little bit more, and then hopefully trigger other conversations, I think that's a place to start. I really think that's a place to start. So I really appreciate the kindness of that comment, and I appreciate the support. I know, some of you watch the news, and every time Florida comes up, you go, ah. We're very proud of our ADR program. It's one of the best in the country. It's one of the things we do well. So there is that. But I really appreciate it. I'm glad to help connect people with resources down here. I'll put my email in the chat. It's not my Nova one, it's my personal one. So it's there. If you want to reach out and further, you're welcome to do so.
Thanks, Anna.
So go to Princeton 8, and I don't know what did there. Sorry, one more.
Okay. So one of the I have one more question that I want to ask everyone, but I also want to highlight two themes that I heard come from Kate and from Pete as well. And Pete, you mentioned sort of building initiatives to last, initiatives that outlast the individual whose idea it was and who's pushing it forward. That's something I think we struggle with here in New York. And Kate, you mentioned volunteering, the issue of resources and time. These are very labor intensive, and it's a real challenge to build DEI initiatives when everyone's a volunteer, or if it's really a single person pushing the initiative. How do you build that leadership? How do you make it last? So I want to throw it out there. What's your last recommendation that you would say for anybody who's interested in building a DEI initiative for a dispute resolution program or an organization? Final words of wisdom. Pete?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
What are your final words of wisdom for anybody who wants to build a DEI ADR initiative? What do you think is the most important thing that they can do?
Yeah, so a strong start starts with your push, your drive. But to my earlier point, you do have to make sure to get it out into the world and out of your hands, so it can live beyond your own capacities. One key thing, this is more just a leadership principle that I've tried to apply to this work, is to really make sure that what you're doing has an impact not only on those that you can actually, from 1 degree of separation, see, but far beyond you, far beyond what you are able to touch, feel, see, and sense. Make sure that it kind of reverberates past those impacts, and that does take a selflessness, because you won't reap the benefits, even the feel goods from that. But it does ensure that someone else can kind of take the baton, run with it. And to the extent you can, I encourage the efforts to be nameless, faceless, so that it is kind of as easily portable and transferable to the next go-getter, to carry on.
Thanks, Kate. Kate, words of wisdom?
Well, so one thing I want to say is that I view our training as successful. So we had 16 participants, 6 of whom are doing mediation and getting paid, and I think are fully engaged that way. I will say those people were the participants who were more kind of at the end, or those sort of in the latter third of their careers. But we've gone from 0 mediators of color in the state to 6. So that's amazing. One of the other people in our class, who's Vietnamese American, was appointed to the bench in a county in Oregon where that's a big deal. So that's, I view this as a success. And I will say, we had no idea what we were doing. When we came up with this project, I did a lot of Googling in 2020, and I really couldn't find anything out there. And I will just say, like, it's just important to start. For a long time, my husband is a plaintiff's lawyer, and he would ask me, like, he does civil rights and employment litigation for plaintiffs, and he would say, like, can you find me a mediator who's a lawyer who's not white? And I couldn't. And I would talk to the people I know who would definitely know, and they didn't know. And they also didn't know that there were 0 in the state, which surprised me. But we just sort of, bumbled and experimented our way along. But the thing we did was we got off our butts. Instead of just, complaining to one another, we actually decided to try to do something about it, even with the understanding at the outset that it might yield 0 additional legal mediators of color. We didn't know what would happen. And we kind of went into it thinking, like, this is important enough that we have to do it, even if we don't know that it will visibly move the needle in the next couple of years. So I guess my advice is just start. I mean, obviously it's better to start smartly than not, but just start.
Nice. Anna?
My past life before becoming a lawyer was in the field of international development and program management. And the guy who was my first boss, basically out of college, was like a long-term development guy. And we were tasked with basically spending taxpayer money on trainings, on events and other things all around the world. And his line was always, actually from Tuxedo, New York. His line was always, you need a political envelope. You need an institutional grounding. You need a political envelope. You need a policy reason for your why. You need an institutional support. You need to build institutional leadership and buy-in there, so you won't be that one person whose head can get cut off and then the whole thing dies. And so one part of what I've been doing down here in the ADR section of the bar, and that's why I'm working more statewide instead of with my county bar. I'll go there eventually, but first you got to boomerang the idea out, and if it's cool, it comes back, right? But we're building a standing diversity committee into the bylaws. We are changing the bylaws so that it will show up and stay there. We are basically working to create that committee, to create that part of the section's mission as being something that's built in. We're baking it into the strategic plan for the section. And so I realize that we have a very developed sort of like ADR sector down here. There's about 6,000 mediators in the state, so that's quite a bit. The ADR section targets mid-career mediators a lot of times, because sometimes you get that first. There's a set of comments that we had in there in the chat that isn't.
Anna,
I thought of it in AAA.
I apologize.
No, sure.
tried to message you, but I
No,
have
not
to
at all. Go ahead.
wrap it up so everybody can get their CLE. But I think that message of institutionalizing your initiatives, your DEI initiatives, building them to last, try something, and you need to implement leadership for long-term success are just wonderful pieces of wisdom that you've shared with us to help build these things to outlast us. So I just want to thank you all for bringing your experience from your jurisdictions here to New York, and I will turn it over to Genesis to wrap up.
Thank you so much. What a fantastic panel. I learned a lot. I know everyone else did. I say that every time, but I'm clearly very excited. I want to share the final CLE code word, which is creativity. The final word for today is creativity. So for those seeking CLE credit, this is a reminder that each of you received an electronic version of the CLE form. So just click on the link, type in the 4 words, click submit, and you are done. So thank you once again, Professor Weinstein, for leading that panel. And I just want to share some key takeaways from today's discussion as I go into closing us out for this event. So the 4th word is creativity. Great. So we learned, when we spoke with Mary Smith today, we talked about exploring the hiring of diverse neutrals. And she encouraged us to find opportunities to take those standard historical lists of neutrals and add to it. David Reinman was here talking about the importance of making sure that people of all abilities have meaningful access to and can fully participate in the mediation process. It starts with simply asking if people need an accommodation and what it looks like for them. With Bridget McCormack, we talked about diversity as an opportunity to grow public confidence in our systems, and also as an approach that isn't just focused outward at rosters of neutrals, but also applied internally to equity for staff on many measurable levels. And then with this last panel, we heard about some thoughtful DEI programs from around the country and the imperative to educate and challenge legal community to engage talented neutrals and to make sure these programs keep going forward. So not just the recruitment and training, but also helping people get through the door and flourish. I want to take a moment to thank all of our speakers. So Dean Crowell, Bill Johnston, Jeff Zano, Mary Smith, David Reinman, Bridget McCormack,